All right. Good morning again, everyone. Nice to see some familiar and friendly faces. Hi, everyone. My name is Ian Henderson. I'm the Policy and Systems Director here at WCASA, and thank you for joining us today. It's kind of the first time we've tried this, and I think maybe this is one of these sort of unintended or upsides of the pandemic that we're getting used to and doing much more virtual events, obviously only virtual events, but this is the first time we're doing a kind of just a Zoom legislative agenda briefing, I guess, for if you want to call it that. What I'm going to do today is just kind of walk you through the agenda, and obviously we'll be happy to take questions if folks have any, and we can have a conversation. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we will be putting the legislative agenda up on the website. And Peter and I were just talking before, so we're going to be recording this webinar, which we can also archive. Not that you and Leslie want to watch it again, but if you did and or want to share that information with others who weren't able to attend, know that we'll be that we are recording it, and Peter will be putting this up on the website so folks can view that at a later date. All right, so let me go ahead and share my screen, and you should now be seeing the legislative agenda. Are we seeing that? If I can just get someone to give me a thumbs up that or not? Yeah, okay, great, thanks, Kelly. So here we have our public policy agenda. The format, it looks very similar to previous years, right? And so I'm not going to go through line by line. When we get to the more meatier part of the agenda, we'll pause and walk through that. But first thing to say about our agenda, like previous sessions, right? Like this is our agenda at this moment in time, right? It's not a completely fixed document. There may be policies that come up as the legislative session comes on, or as legislators propose bills, as we hear from programs that identify gaps or areas where there might be needed policy work, right? This is not meant to be completely fixed and representing the only things that we're going to be working on. It's really our best guess of right now, based on some things that happened last session, based on priorities we've developed in the past. These are the things that we are going to be intending to focus our efforts on. And we're very early days in the legislative session. I'll talk a little bit about that as we go through, and towards the end, the session kicked off really January 4th, I guess. So we're really early on. But yes, so that very much this is a living document. We've also included some of the grounding information for WCASA, who we are, right? Our vision, our mission, foundation, and really critical is that anti-oppression framework. And as we go through the agenda and we talk about some of the allied issues that WCASA will absolutely be supporting, but right, we probably won't be the lead. We'll be following the lead of those organizations who are advocating those areas, right? This is just kind of committing down that, right, we absolutely centering Black and Indigenous people of color and the work that they are doing, and as our commitment to become an anti-racist organization, right? We are wanting to center that in our policy and legislative advocacy work as well. So moving down to the sexual violence specific issues, right? These are representing those bills that really are sexual assault focused, and where we would likely be the lead along with other organizations working on bills that are directly impacting survivors, where sexual violence is at the core of those policy initiatives. So I want to first start off with kind of exactly where we are in the budget and in terms of this legislation. And that's really what's occupying a lot of, will be occupying the legislature's time and energy in the coming weeks. Starting next, I believe it's Tuesday, February 16th, the governor will be releasing his executive budget, right? And that will kick us off in the budget season. The budget's supposed to be done by the end of June. And so the first item on there, and that I want to spend some time talking about, is our advocacy with respect to the budget, because it does look a little bit different than it has in previous years, right? Some of you who have been engaged with WCASA over the previous couple of legislative sessions know that we spent a real concerted effort on focusing on enhancing and increasing funding for the Sexual Assault Victim Services Program, right? SAVES, which is the only state funding for sexual assault victim services that funds not only direct services, but prevention as an allowable activity under that grant program, which is administered by the Wisconsin Department of Justice. Again, right, folks who have been around for a while, remember, we were looking and pushing to increase saves by roughly about $3 million per year from the past 2 budget sessions. So going back now as far as 2015. And obviously, and ultimately, we were not successful in either of those sessions. And so that's not the primary reason why we're doing things a little bit differently this session, but I mean, that is a factor. I think the other piece is just looking at how sexual assault services, the structure of the funding and how that's changed, particularly in the past 2 years, right? And we look at other sources of funding, we talk specifically about VOCA dollars, right? And in partnering with the Department of Justice, Wisconsin DOJ, in really wanting to prioritize sexual assault services in VOCA funding, particularly in dual service agencies, right? DOJ was requiring dual programs to hire 2 sexual assault advocates. And so because of that, right, we've seen programs responding, right, and hiring additional folks. We've also seen, so I think some of the issues relating to the structure of funding related to VOCA and the increased hiring of sexual assault advocates as part of that. And then still seeing, we do still hear from DOJ that there's still turnback with respect to SAVES funding in Wisconsin. And probably those 2 things are part of the reason why we have met challenges and barriers in terms of increasing SAVES in recent sessions. And so what we're focused on a much more targeted and small increase in SAVES in this particular session, and really looking at increasing SAVES to fund WCASA to provide training and technical assistance to programs in the state. So with that, and you might remember, right, that as part of our past advocacy related to increasing SAVES was allocating a portion of that increase to fund WCASA to meet that demand for increased training and technical assistance that we anticipated would be happening as programs hire new staff with the additional SAVES dollars, right? So in some respects, that's always been part of our SAVES advocacy. What we've seen in the past 2 years in particular is an increase in demand on WCASA's training and technical assistance. And I think part of that may be attributable to the programs hiring new advocates in line with those VOCA requirements that I spoke about. And so what we have experienced here as the coalition is increased training and increased demand for training and technical assistance, right? Without us experiencing an increase in any federal dollars to provide that training and technical assistance. We don't receive any and have not received any SAVES money since that program has been administered at DOJ. And so that increase in our demand for our training and technical assistance with existing funding, we have over the past 2 years, if we look particularly at our core training, right, our SAVES training, Sexual Assault Victim Advocacy School, we've increased the frequency and the capacity of those trainings over the past 2 years and have still been running waiting lists for that event. And we've also seen over the past 2 years, 12 new member programs, 12 new sexual assault service providers. And so for WCASA, right, looking to stabilize our training and technical assistance and having a stable source of funding, that we have pitched this to both DOJ and to the governor's office in the past couple months to increase SAVES by roughly $100,000 a year. So we're talking about $200,000 over the biennium, right? We're not asking the governor to fund training and technical assistance out of the existing pot, right? We are asking for an increase. It's just a small targeted increase that would be allocated to WCASA to provide, to ensure that, right, high quality training and technical assistance is available to member programs. So I wanted to spend some time on this because it does look very different from the past, really 4 years of our budget advocacy. That's our focus right now, and that's what we will be. We met with the governor's office or staff at the governor's office virtually, of course, right? It does look different. Advocacy right now with the legislature and with policymakers to make that pitch. So if folks have any, I can pause if folks have any questions about that. In terms of the process, like I said, the governor's releasing his budget next week. Then it goes to joint finance, right? And so as you all undoubtedly are aware, right, we have divided government in Wisconsin. So while the governor gets to release his executive budget, it then goes to the legislature and the joint finance committee. We don't know what they're going to do, right? We don't know whether, unlike like 2 years ago, is joint finance just going to start with their own budget? Are they going to use the governor's budget as a starting off point? Because the legislature is controlled by the Republicans, and obviously the governor is a Democrat, that makes it a little bit less clear what's going to happen in terms of what the Joint Finance Committee, which is the budget writing committee in the legislature, what they're going to be doing. Obviously, our hope would be that the governor includes our budget ask in his executive budget. And then we would be going to the legislature and the finance committee to try and shore that up. But we don't know. Obviously, we'll find out more next week. But it's even more uncertain with, unlike previous times, maybe where the governor's budget is we can pretty much count on that being the starting point. It's not clear whether that's going to be the starting point with the Joint Finance Committee. I think the other thing to say, right, about the legislative session is what's happening in the legislature, and I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you all don't know, right, by just the political climate in our country and in the state is really polarized right now. And so if you think about even last week with the legislature repealing the mask mandate and the governor then reissuing it, right, things are hyper polarized at the Capitol right now. And so, and we're now looking, people's eyes in the government are looking at 2 years down the road when the governor is up for re-election, which seems crazy to be thinking, right, that we're already thinking 2 years down the road, but very much I think that's going to shape this legislative session as well. So yeah, none of us I don't have a crystal ball in terms of what's going to happen with the session. It seems to have started off slowly, but I did want to spend some time talking about the budget. So let me just stop and just see if there are any questions. I'm going to be pausing throughout, so it's not your only opportunity, but just let me pause for a second to see if people have any questions about what I've talked about with respect to the SAVES budget. Peter, anything in chat, or if people want to unmute, you can certainly do it that way.
Nothing currently in the chat. Definitely unmute yourselves if you have questions. Okay. But so far, nothing in the chat.
Okay. Well, I'll keep going. And again, if folks have questions, you can either put them in chat or just go ahead and unmute yourself. But I'll keep going through the agenda and talking about some of our non-budgetary advocacy. So I'm going to start with what is on the next heading on the agenda here regarding prohibiting sexual contact by a law enforcement officer with a person in their custody, right? This legislation was introduced last session. WCASA supported it. It passed the Assembly and made it out of committee in the Senate, but was not able to clear the hurdle and make it to the floor of the Senate before the session ended. Not really aware of any specific objections or concerns. So it's being circulated again for introduction. I don't think it's been formally introduced yet, but I know the authors who were involved, excuse me, last time, and it did have bipartisan support, are circulating it again. And basically what this does is close an existing loophole in Wisconsin law to ensure that, right, and to prohibit law enforcement officers from engaging in sexual contact with someone that is in their custody, right? We recognize the power disparity and imbalance in those situations. We view it akin to, right, what's already prohibited under second-degree sexual assault regarding sexual contact by someone who is a correctional officer and someone who is an inmate at a correctional facility, right? That's currently would fall under second-degree sexual assault. Consent is not an element in this crime. Similarly, right, for under this bill, consent would not be an element under this crime. And so we are going to be supporting that again. Like I said, I can tell you that it's coming back up, and hopefully, given the progress in terms of hearings in both committees in both houses, and passing the assembly, that hopefully the prospects are good for this. So stay tuned on that. It's something we will be engaging on as well. But moving on to child sexual abuse prevention education, right? This you might have heard as Aaron's Law, right? And something that has come up frequently in previous sessions. A lot of that is down to the advocacy of a survivor. Her name is Erin Marin, I think. And she has been very active and engaged in promoting child sexual abuse prevention initiatives across the country, right? And so she has a specific connection to Wisconsin. I actually believe she's a survivor, and the assault happened in Wisconsin. And so this legislation has come up. It's had bipartisan support in the past. WCASA in previous sessions has kind of taken a more neutral view. We thought there were ways that we could improve it. And so last session, we partnered with Children's Hospital of Wisconsin and the Child Abuse and Prevention Board, Child Abuse and Neglect Prevention Board. I knew that was missing part of their acronym, to meet with the authors and to advocate for really strengthening it, right? We didn't have any concerns with it. We just felt like there are some ways that we could really strengthen and bring in some best practices related to child sexual abuse prevention. And so we met with the authors, and again, this was also had bipartisan support, who did introduce an amendment that incorporated our suggestions that brought in elements of WCASA's 10 core concepts of child sexual abuse prevention. You can see on our agenda, right, it's hyperlinked to our page to find out more about that. But that both of the authors in the Senate and the Assembly introduced amendments to incorporate our recommendations, which is really, we were really pleased by that. The bill didn't move, and it's possible it didn't move because of the amendment, and that was not our intent, right? That's sometimes a cynical way to prevent a bill from moving, is introducing language that might not be palatable, and that was not our intent to do that. We really were looking at a bill we could really engage on, right? That we felt adopted and incorporated best practices. And I believe that the amended version was shared with Erin, who gave her thumbs up to that. And so we're going to be connecting, and we'll be in the coming weeks, had just some very brief conversations with Children's Hospital, again, on doing some proactive engagement on this. So that's something we will be working on as well. Now I'm going to move on to the second page. I'm going to jump around a little bit. So I want to start with, we'll come back to the HIV prophylaxis, but move on to the statute of limitations for child victims. That you may have heard called the Child Victims Act, right? It's also a concept, and it's legislation that has been around for a long time here in Wisconsin and across the country. Some of you may remember that now nearly, I guess, 11 years ago, the bill nearly was passed into law right before the end of the Doyle administration, right? So showing how far back we're going. But was ultimately killed really at the end of that session, unfortunately, and has now continued to come up without much success, unfortunately. Basically, what this legislation does was eliminate the civil statute of limitations for child sexual abuse survivors, and perhaps somewhat controversially, creates a 3-year window, whereas where someone whose claim is currently barred by the civil statute of limitations, again, someone who is a child survivor of sexual violence, could have a 3-year window where they could file a suit and file a claim against their perpetrator after that law is enacted. Again, WCASA, along with NASW, the National Association of Social Workers, the Wisconsin chapter, survivors have been really engaged on that. We spent a fair amount of time last session meeting with the majority party, right? Because this unfortunately has not had bipartisan support. Last session, particularly, we know that, right, in the political climate, right, and based on who controls the legislature, you need bipartisan support, right, to get a bill to have a hearing, right? We can have legislation introduced, and this was introduced last session, but without any members of the majority party on board, it languished and nothing happened. So there's a group, Child USA, national group, who's doing a lot of advocacy, and I know other states have been engaging with this. We're connected with other coalitions who have been working on similar legislation. So it remains a priority. And I think whether, there are things we need to look at in terms of how the bill has been drafted, is there some sort of incremental progress? I don't know, right? But I think, it's something that we want to continue to engage with. And I think it also is looking at justice outside of the criminal justice system, right? It's looking at enhancing the ability of survivors to seek justice through a different avenue in the legal system. And that's appealing, right? Looking beyond, right, the criminal justice system as a place for survivors to get relief and right, ultimately to seek justice. So again, without something having changed, which in the last election, the makeup of the legislature did not significantly change. Realistically, it's kind of hard to imagine the prospects for success being super great. But again, right, like that's not the only reason to engage on an issue, and you look to build support, and there's turnover in the legislature too, right? And so you never know who may have some connection to the issue. And so I think, again, right, that's something we are going to continue to look at supporting. All right, so I'm going to move.
Quick thing,
yeah, thanks, Peter. Go ahead.
Susan shared that she thanks you for continuing to fight for this law to pass, and shared a story, her personal story of a friend of hers in the chat. She says this has got to pass.
Great, thank you so much for sharing that. Yes, I agree. Again, we've had myself and Mark Herstand, who's from the Wisconsin chapter of the National Association of Social Workers, and a survivor, did a lot of legislative visits on this, and it was a little discouraging, and maybe little is sugarcoating that a little bit, just to kind of meet with offices to try and get that support to make this a bipartisan bill. It seemed like this would be a place to that some common ground could be found, right? But for whatever reason, whether it's the power of some of the religious institutions who very much opposed these efforts, so yeah, know that the advocacy continues. So I appreciate you sharing that in chat. And again, you can definitely reach out to me and know that we communicate. I'll send out action alerts and updates, and we're talking about ways to keep our membership and our programs and survivors and people who are just interested in policy advocacy in this area engaged. And so we've talked about partnering with my colleague at End Abuse, Jenna Gormal, who's their policy person, and doing some more frequent calls, Zoom calls, where we can share some updates. So know that we're looking at adapting in how we communicate information. And while I'm always available for questions and technical assistance, looking at doing some more proactive, making some more proactive time available for programs, for survivors, for advocates who are interested in this to engage. So stay tuned for more on that. Going to move on to another area that we spent a lot of time on last session related to sexual assault kits. So again, I'm kind of moving down here, and we'll come back up to those other issues in a second, right? WCASA, along with the Department of Justice, along with the Joyful Heart Foundation and survivors, spent a lot of time engaging on legislation to really reform and codify existing protocols for how sexual assault kits are handled in the state, and to try and prevent another accumulation or backlog of kits that are sitting on law enforcement shelves and not tested, right? So this had a long kind of sordid history last session. We came out really positively in the spring of, I guess it was 2019, with huge bipartisan support for two bills. One that really, again, codified protocols that have been adopted or created, I should say, by the Attorney General's Sexual Assault Response Team, or AG-SART, right? Practices and procedures that were the product of multidisciplinary collaboration and really reflected subject matter expertise, right? So we went to the legislature and had, again, vast bipartisan support on bills that would ensure that kits are collected by law enforcement, that they are sent into the crime lab and tested in a timely manner, right? The other kind of companion bill to this was creating a sexual assault kit tracking system that will allow survivors to anonymously obtain information about the status and location of their kit, right? That's another important piece of the puzzle, right? And it's one of the Joyful Heart Foundations, right? Joyful Heart, national leader in sexual assault kit reform, one of their pillars of legislative reform to give survivors not only information, but by having that information and also trying to prevent a backlog so that survivors could really find out where their kit was and what the status was. And so we don't want survivors to have to be the ones, moving things forward, but allowing them to have that information along with those clear timeframes in the other legislation that I mentioned. We thought this was a really good package of bills, and it passed the Senate overwhelmingly. One of them passed on a voice vote, the other passed on unanimously, and then we ran into problems in the Assembly. And so I don't know what I can give you my what I think happened. I think it became very political. I think there were concerns about the involvement of DOJ and the AG, who is a Democrat now, and basically we couldn't get the Assembly Health Committee to hold a hearing on the bill that passed in the Senate. And what they ended up doing at the end of last session is introducing their own bill that had some real, you talk about poison pills, right? I mentioned by amending or introducing language that has things that people will oppose. That's what happened, right? It had language in there about school choice. It had language in there about immigration, right? Nothing to do with sexual assault kits, and that we could not support. And so that bill that was introduced late in the session, that was not the product of bipartisan agreement. It was not the product of subject matter expertise. We testified in opposition to that, and ultimately the Assembly passed the version that we didn't like. The Senate didn't take it up, which we were pleased. The Senate liked the bill they passed, which was the bill we were supporting, along with DOJ and Joyful Heart and survivors. And so the end result was nothing happened, right? which the cynic in me says that was the point from the assembly all along. So where does that leave us this session? That leaves us with, now we see last Friday, the Senate introducing the original bill that we supported, identical to the bill that we supported last session. That I just saw yesterday has a bill number. It's SB 71. It is identical to the bill we supported. I believe the kit tracking bill, also identical to the one we supported, is circulating. It's not been introduced, at least as of yesterday. And so it stands to reason, right? We will support that legislation. It kind of came as a surprise to not only WCASA, but to DOJ, that the legislation was being circulated again. The authors did not reach out to us, and that's okay, right? That's not a requirement for our support. If we think it's good policy, which we do, we will support it. And so, we will absolutely support this legislation. It has not been introduced in the assembly yet. And so, right, that still seems to be the hurdle. We need that. Last session, the Senate was not the problem. The problem was the assembly. And whether it was the speaker, whether it was the chair of the health committee, Representative Sanfilippo, I don't know, right? And some of that is inside information and inside baseball politics that is beyond my ability to figure out, and it doesn't really matter, right? Our sort of perspective is, do we think this is good for survivors? And if we do, then we're going to support it. And so we'll absolutely support it again. Joyful Heart Foundation is engaged again. We had a meeting with them in DOJ. And I think, we just want the bill to pass. And so whatever we can do to make that happen, we'll be reaching out to the authors. It does have bipartisan support. But again, I think we needed to get hearings, and we needed to move quickly. And that's probably what we'll be engaging on, is ensuring that while it's great that the bills have been introduced so early, or at least on the Senate side has introduced it in February, right? It wasn't introduced until, I think it was April or May. I think it was April, because it was Sexual Assault Awareness Month of 19. So an early start, it helps, right? But still needs to go through the process. We still need to have hearings held. So stay tuned on that. Peter, was that you?
Yeah, you might have helped answer part of Casey's question about what exactly the holdup is. Is it the bipartisan support? Is it the process? Is it both?
I don't know. Yeah, Casey. I mean, I would be guessing, right? All I can tell you, what I do know is the holdup was the assembly. We could not get them to hold a hearing and when they did hold a hearing, they introduced a new bill that had those really unrelated and what we thought were harmful, actually harmful. It wasn't just that they were unrelated that led us to oppose. We thought they were bad for survivors, particularly immigrant survivors. I think it was politics. And I don't know what was it, because they didn't want the AG to get a quote unquote win. I don't know any of that. None of that was ever shared with me, nor would I ever expect it to be. So we have to play, we have to guess. But what we do know is, right, the assembly didn't hold a hearing on the bill that the Senate passed unanimously. And they introduced a different version that had some really bad and unrelated things included at the end of the day, or at the very late in the day, I guess is what I'm saying, right? In February, it was about a year ago that hearing was held, and then we had COVID, right? So the session ended pretty abruptly in March, but that's really late to be introducing legislation. And they had from May of 19, right, to February of 20 to do something, and nothing happened. So, why and what, I don't know. I can give you my suppositions, and I have, but.
So the assembly didn't bring it to the table and added harmful pieces to the new bill.
They didn't hold a hearing on the bill we were supporting, and they introduced a different bill that had exactly harmful provisions. So I'd be happy to chat more about that, and I could probably chat as long as you, more information than you ever want on that. But I do want to keep an eye on the time, so I'm going to move us along.
Just one point of clarification before we.
Yeah.
What does a timely matter mean? And is there a statutory time limit that is deemed acceptable?
Yes. The short answer is, and I don't have the bill in front of me, I believe, let me just say it this way without guessing at the time. It puts specific time frames upon, and it's defined, I think it's 72 hours, that law enforcement has to pick up the kit from the hospital and a specific time frame in which they have to send the kit to the crime lab. I think that was 14 days. Again, it's in the bill. I'd be happy to share the bill with you. It's SB 71. You can find it online, but the short answer is it didn't just say in a timely manner. It put a very specific time frame in. Thank you for that. Okay. Sex trafficking. On my screen, I see Claudine, one of our resident experts on sex trafficking in Wisconsin. So hi, Claudine, and I'm glad, nice to see you. And I know I had a question come in about the safe harbor bill, which safe harbor, it was the way the bill, what it was referred to as. What it basically did was prohibit prosecution of child sex trafficking victims, right? Prohibited charging them with prostitution. Also had been around for several sessions. Something WCASA has supported along with many other organizations, and ultimately did not pass last session. It had bipartisan support. It kind of got weird in the Senate last time with amendments late in the day that seemed to really basically gut the premise of the bill. And it is absolutely a policy we support. I don't know in terms of whether this is going to be introduced again. It's something we would want to reach out to the leads in the Assembly and Senate. I think there were some frustrations, I think, as to how that shook out at the end of the day, again, very late in the session. But again, we view it as an opportunity to engage. Unlike others where I can say, yes, I think, or it already has been introduced, I don't know. Claudine, not to put you on the spot, but if you have anything to share on that.
Thank you. One of the things that I think about is that some of the resistance that I also heard was coming from several communities who were unconvinced that there was enough support for minors, because the theory has always been that law enforcement insists on is that the only way to really get assistance for minors who are being trafficked is by charging them. And the changes to the law that insisted that people are supposed to make referrals to Child Protective Services have had some positive effects in some counties and communities, but there are numerous counties and communities who feel like there is an insufficient response. So they're not willing to let go of this tool that they feel like they still have. There's also some conversation going on among those of us doing this work about the fact that safe harbor to begin with is oftentimes built in with funding. And that gets even more complicated, obviously, when you add in, they basically tried to make the bill as simple as possible. Don't charge minors, just don't. And there's still conversation about people wishing that there was more supports inside the bill. So it is kind of complicated at this point, but it's also really frustrating as a person who does this work, because it feels like there are many people who I run into all across the state who still think, who actually are under the belief that you can't charge minors, who think that because you can't charge minors in other states, or because the federal law says they're all considered to be sex trafficking victims, why are we still charging them? And we know through some data collection that, in fact, numerous communities, while reporting no incidents of sex trafficking of minors, are also charging minors with prostitution offenses. DOJ has been able to track this.
Yeah.
work to be done.
Yep, indeed. Well, thank you, Claudine, and I'm glad you were able to join us today to share your input and expertise on this. So WCASA, does we sit on have Alma, my colleague Alma Mann sits on the Anti-Human Trafficking Consortium. They have a legislative subcommittee, and those are meetings that I, along with my partner at NWS, Jenna, attend. So know that we will be absolutely looking to those experts in the field in terms of policy initiatives related to sex trafficking. And undoubtedly, bills will come up related to this because they always seem to. But that's one I know I wanted to touch on because it's something we did, again, proactively engage on. That safe harbor legislation seemed like it was really lining up last session, and then kind of at the end, it fell apart. So, all right. Just quickly on some of the other policy areas that I kind of skipped over, I'll just touch on these briefly. Excuse me, and then I want to talk about some of those allied issues and some of the policies that will be, again, following the lead of allied organizations, but absolutely supporting and engaging on as well. HIV prophylaxis, it's not, we wanted to signal this as a priority for WCASA in terms of policy development. Not clear whether legislation is required here. Basically, our focus here is to ensure that, right, as you can see, survivors have free and timely access to this critical medication. Recently, DOJ, who administers the SAFE fund, right, the Sexual Assault Forensic Exam Fund, right, to ensure that survivors don't have to pay for the cost of their forensic examination. DOJ clarified that the SAFE fund can be billed for this medication. The issue is that these medications are really expensive, right? And so there's an existing cap on payments. It's about $1,200, which is less than the typical cost for the meds. So we have been working with advocacy organizations, partner organizations, and DOJ to explore solutions to this to, again, ensure that free and timely access is available for survivors. I think what's clear to us is that it really is it varies across the state what information and the ability to access, not only information, but the ability to access this medication varies greatly across the state. And so because of that, we have been working with the AG SART, and they identified this as a priority. We will be continuing to work with DOJ. Again, perhaps this is something where less that involves the legislature, more is looking at existing administrative rules, which I guess ultimately does involve the legislature, but may not need to be a standalone bill is what I'm saying. But we wanted to put this on our agenda to signal, right, that this is something we are and will continue to be engaging on. Just real quickly, some of the other ones. Access to confidential survivor information. Again, legislation that has been around for a couple sessions, really trying to strengthen privacy rights for survivors, particularly related to some cases in existing law. You may have heard them as Shifra and Green or Shifra Green law, which is about criminal defendants' ability to access a survivor's privileged healthcare records, usually therapy records. And so this legislation has had bipartisan support, trying to strengthen the threshold that a defense attorney and a criminal defendant would have to reach before they're able to access that information. Again, not sure whether this will be introduced again, and so, but it's something we've actively supported, and we believe in that as a policy, as a policy topic, and so we'll be looking for opportunities to see, what might be possible this session. Housing, again, late and just saw a bill related to housing introduced late last week. And I want to spend some time taking a look at it because on its face, it looks it looks promising, but I just saw it yesterday. Really, so you might be aware that we have the safe housing law we have in Wisconsin, which allows survivors to terminate their lease early and with minimal financial consequence if they are a survivor of sexual assault or domestic abuse, right? To obtain those protections and then to obtain the ability to end their lease early, they have to have some proof requirements under existing law, and basically that centers around an injunction, right? So they would have to file a restraining order and again an injunction against the person who caused harm, or a copy of a criminal complaint or a condition of release. And so, as you can imagine, right, some of the challenge for sexual assault survivors in particular is they either have to file a restraining order and get an injunction, or it requires criminal justice system action, right? Unlike domestic abuse where there's a mandatory arrest, so there'd be a condition of release. We don't have that for sexual assault, and we're not necessarily arguing we should either. But those can be barriers for survivors because they either have to file a restraining order and prove, right, that they are a survivor. It's lower standard in civil court, or the criminal justice system needs to have taken some action. So we have supported increased flexibility for survivors to terminate their rental agreement. You know, looking at maybe advocates being able to sign a form attesting that the person is a victim. So we just saw this bill come out. So I want to take a look at that. We also want to be thinking about privacy and privilege, but it's possible there's some room for movement on this because it's something we've been looking at over the past couple of years. And we did see, I think it was Senator Jacques, introduce the bill just late last week. So no, I may be reaching out to some of you to get your thoughts on it because while, again, like I said, on its face, it seems good. I want to think it through to make sure there's not any unintended negative consequences for survivors. So stay tuned for more on that. And then just lastly, so I talked about housing. Campus was the other item on here. Again, looking at strengthening partnerships between campuses and sexual assault service providers. We're looking at, do we want to require MOUs between campuses and SASPs to ensure that partnership and to assure confidential services are available, community-based services are available to campus survivors. That has not, legislation's been circulated before. It's not really moved a lot. But again, I think we want to signal that, and we also know that not on a state level, but on a federal level, maybe there are changes afoot once again with Title IX with a new administration in Washington. So that's not related specifically to what's on our agenda, but the topic, and continue to explore that idea of how can we facilitate, and is legislation necessary? But as a policy matter, right, facilitating partnerships between SASPs and campuses is something we will support. Okay, we see we've got about 10 minutes left. So I think I'm just going to go and talk through some of the allied issues. Again, as you can see right on the agenda, while not specific to sexual assault, they're core to our foundation and mission and vision and our anti-oppression framework. And so we view them as integral to our work. So, right, we will be, right, may not be the lead organization, but we'll follow the lead of those organizations who are leading the policy initiatives in these areas. And I can talk about just some concrete examples. Obviously, racial justice, right, as part of our anti-oppression framework, and in striving to become an anti-racist organization, we want to look at and support policies that transform systems and eliminate their negative and disproportionate impact on Black and Indigenous people of color. And that's really looking at the criminal justice system, which is why when we can focus on reforms outside and policies outside of the criminal justice system, we want to spend time looking at that because we know that system has caused harm to BIPOC communities. And so some of the policies that we've seen come up in previous sessions would be looking at prohibiting discrimination based on conviction record in employment, right? We know Wisconsin has some of the worst racial disparities in our criminal justice system. And so that ban the box, you may have heard that term used, but that bill, there was legislation to promote that on a statewide level. Right now, it's very much on a community by community level that would prohibit discrimination based on employment, based on conviction record in employment. That would be something we would absolutely be supporting. We've opposed extending mandatory minimum sentences, and there were some bills to do that last session, and we registered an opposition of that. But we'll be looking and looking to follow the lead of allied organizations in promoting racial justice. LGBTQ rights, again, I think conversion therapy, looking to ban conversion therapy. There's been legislation introduced last session. We supported that. I fully expect that will come up again. Again, similar to the ban the box idea, right? Individual communities across the state have banned conversion therapy. We're looking for a statewide a ban, and so we'll be supporting that. Also prohibiting discrimination based on gender identity and expression in housing areas and employment, education, and public accommodation. Those will be areas that we will be supporting and engaging on. Immigration. There has been legislation called anti-sanctuary city or anti-sanctuary city bills introduced that we have opposed. And what that basically does is prohibits cities and towns and local communities from enacting ordinances that prevent local law enforcement from cooperating with ICE and in an effort to reduce racial profiling and reduce deportation of undocumented immigrants. We have opposed those anti-sanctuary city bills in previous sessions. If they come up again, no, we will continue to oppose that. On a more proactive front, though, want to support policies that also prohibit discrimination in housing based on citizenship and immigration status, and looking at removing barriers to accessing driver's license for immigrants. All things that have come up and been identified by allied organizations. I'll come back to MMIW in a second. Reproductive health care and access. Again, a priority for WCASA. We have supported legislation that was shackling legislation that basically limited the use of restraints on pregnant people who are in custody. That legislation was introduced, had bipartisan support last session. We would support that again. Also looking to support repealing the criminal abortion statute, right? That criminal abortion statute has been held to be unenforceable due to federal court decisions, but our partners at the Wisconsin Alliance for Women's Health and Planned Parenthood have been leading the advocacy on that, and we absolutely will support those policies and really just supporting access, ensuring comprehensive reproductive health care services and medically accurate sexual health education is available. Economic justice, again, some of these categories, right, overlap for sure. We continue to support paid family leave legislation. Organizations like 9 to 5 in Milwaukee have been supporting that as an economic justice and a racial justice issue. We will continue to support that, looking at increasing the minimum wage and access to high quality healthcare, childcare services. And then specific to COVID-19, right? We know that continuing to support the suspension of the waiting period for unemployment and prohibiting evictions and foreclosures during the public health crisis. And last, just to talk about MMIW, which stands for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women. You may remember that there were some grassroots efforts by some Indigenous advocates in Wisconsin to work with legislators to create a bill that would create a missing and murdered Indigenous women task force in Wisconsin. We supported those efforts. We lobbied on those bills last session. We testified at a hearing very late. It was March. It was really right before everyone kind of went virtual. But the legislation did not pass. Since that time, the Attorney General has created an MMIW task force. And so we would support policies implementing the recommendations of the MMIW task force. Okay, a lot of me talking. We've got about 3 minutes, so I'll just pause, see if there are questions. And yeah.
Oh yeah, so Yelda is wondering our stance on intelligence and disability development, and if anything WCASA is looking to do for that as far as trainings, awareness, legislation.
Yeah, I probably, it sounds like with people with disabilities, was that the question? It was about, I couldn't see it in chat. I could probably.
Yeah. I/DD, which intelligence / disability development.
Okay. Yes, I think for, that would be those policies, we would be looking at Disability Rights Wisconsin, who is a statewide advocacy organization for people with disabilities. So probably what I would be looking to is their input and expertise on bills and legislation in that area, because they are absolutely the experts. But we, to your point, right, we know people with disabilities do experience sexual abuse at very high rates. So yes, that would be, there's not a specific policy priority that I have to talk about that we would be engaging on, but absolutely would be supporting and looking to DRW, Disability Rights Wisconsin, as the experts and ways that we can support, and we work closely with them. So thank you.
Any last minute questions? Definitely, you can unmute yourself or type them in the chat.
I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing my screen. There we go. I can see everyone. Hi, everyone.
I had a question.
Yeah, Claudine.
Just overall, so if, say, for example, an organization or people see a piece of legislation that you're not exactly sure how it kind of fits under like what WCASA's priorities are, what is the best way to get a hold of you, or what's the process like to say, hey, we want WCASA's opinion on this, or we want your take on this, or we want your support on this? What does that look like?
Yeah, thank you, Claudine. That would, connecting with me. Peter, can we post my email is definitely right now the best way to reach me, because we are all, well, I'm in my office today, we're all virtual. So email is definitely the best. Peter, could you put my email in chat? There we go. So yes, that would be a great starting point. And so know that in terms of, we've been looking at our agenda and where that fits, but again, right, what I just went through is not the only, okay, if it doesn't, not specifically on there, this is a living document, right? And so the other thing, there's a couple of other ways that we would be vetting policy right now. And I know we're running short on time, but WCASA and NWS signed on to the Moment of Truth letter. Some of you may be aware, in reaction to the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, that really looked at transformative solutions to sexual violence and looking at solutions outside of the criminal justice system. And so that had a lot of policy components to it. And that's going to be something we're going to be looking at. There's also the survivors agenda that absolutely incorporates racial justice, but is a national toolkit. And I'd be happy to share the links. I have them saved. I have them as PDFs. I don't know, Peter, what?
Yeah, we can also send out documents.
Okay, yeah, so we'll send that out. But and then the National Women's Law Center has a playbook on state policy. So, and then our own internal work. But those are some things that we look to, in addition to our allied organizations and getting their expertise as a way of vetting policy. So that's kind of a long answer, Claudine, to your question, but appreciate the question. Anything else?
Unless
Okay.
someone's typing right now, I don't see anything.
All right. Well, I know we're at 11:02, but I guess as a final word, nice to see everyone. Thank you all for coming today. Appreciate all your questions and just you being engaged and interested in what we're going to be doing on the policy front. So thank you. Nice to see you all and look forward to talking to you all in the near future.
Thank you for all your work.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.